took something called the Gulf of Mexico. We changed it, and now it's very routinely the Gulf of America. So if you think about it, we have a Gulf and we have a lake. Now all we need is an ocean. So maybe we'll have to change the name of the Atlantic and or the Pacific. Maybe we'll change them both.
Why are you so focused on doing things like this towards America's allies instead of doing things that...
Well, they haven't treated us well. The Canadian officials have treated us very badly. They're nasty people. They charge our farmers 400% tariffs. They've been doing it for a long time. And I had them figured out in my first term, and I did some pretty strong things and had it getting pretty good. And then the election was rigged, and now I'm coming back and doing it the way it and finishing the job. But they treat us very badly. Canada treats us very badly. I would say that of all countries, as you know, we have President Xi coming in a couple of weeks. We deal with a lot of people, and people oftentimes, they'll ask me, who's the worst to deal with on trade? And I said, that's easy, Canada. They are the worst to trade, and they feel entitled, and just we can't have that.
Joining us, MS Now White House reporter Laura Barón-Lopez, foreign affairs journalist and author of Cosmopolitics on Substack, Elise Labott, executive editor at The Nation, John Nichols, and co-founder and director of economic policy at Veda Partners, Henrietta Trace. There's so many places to start. I just kind of want to start with a fact check before we get into the silliness of Lake America. Henrietta, what is our trade relationship with Canada?
Our trade relationship with Canada is enormous. Indeed, it is our second largest trading partner. And before we get started, can I just say I live down here in Louisiana on the Gulf of America. And unfortunately, I have to report that this does not make gas cheaper. It does not make your housing cheaper. Your grocery store prices are still more expensive. Back to school is still more expensive. None of this will help your bottom line. And that is true with the Gulf of America, as it will be in the Lake of America.
Has Canada been ripping us off?
No, Canada has not been ripping us off. We do a tremendous amount of trade. States like Maine, Canada is their biggest export market. 20,000 jobs in Alaska, huge interrelated supply chains and farming integration across Iowa, Michigan, Texas. It's all over, and they're attached to us. So the economic benefits that are entrenched, 65% of all the trade that happens is just inputs. So stuff coming here that we then put into something else that we then sell and creates economic synergies and the benefits of international trade, even though they're just right there to the north.
The Wall Street Journal editorial board was talking about this a couple days ago, saying the retaliatory tariffs that Canada is going to put on the U.S. auto industry because of Donald Trump's escalation and his demand that Canada pay more and do more. His, bomb he's thrown into this relationship. This is basically telling the auto industry and Ford to drop dead. It's Donald Trump to Ford, according to the Wall Street Journal, not Canada. Donald Trump to Ford, drop dead. John, tell me about the impact that's going to have.
Oh, it's a huge impact. Look, one of the realities is the auto industry developed around these lakes. The Great Lakes is one of the places where, for a variety of reasons, this industry came into being. And it came into being on the U.S. side and the Canadian side. While they are represented by different unions, they are very much the same companies. And what we're talking about here with the President of the United States, I think, is a failure to recognize one of the fundamental realities. And that is that these industries are integrated. They get parts from particular places. They move pieces to other places. And the president is not implementing a tariff policy that is for the good of auto workers in the U.S. or certainly not Canada, or for the good of people in other industries. What you can do tariffs, and the UAW will tell you, there are very good arguments for particular tariffs. There is no question of that. But what they will tell you is it has to be targeted. It has to be thoughtful, and it has to be done in a way that doesn't disrupt or even potentially ruin some of our long-term auto companies.
We are heading into a pretty contentious general election, especially in Michigan, John. Mm-hmm. Does this affect the Senate race there?
I think it could. Look, there are complexities in all this. The president has proven to be very good at suggesting that his tariff somehow will help workers. It is incumbent upon the Democrats in Michigan and, frankly, union folks as well there to explain the real dynamics. But I think if they are, yes, I think it has an impact. And I would put it in a broader context as well. I know that we're talking the pure economics here, but this incredibly chaotic approach to economics in a broader sense, I think is having a huge impact on our political debates in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, Wisconsin, all these places along the Great Lakes, places that I hope I know pretty well. And I just want to emphasize something. Lake Ontario we have an Ontario County in upstate New York. Walt Whitman wrote some of his most beautiful poetry about the soul of America, reflecting on the shore of Lake Ontario. And so the notion that you're going to suddenly tell people that for, some fight over a tariff issue that doesn't even help American workers, you're going to rename places that people know and have read about in their poetry. I just don't see it. I think it's something that actually hits people the wrong way.
It's just also, why is he picking this fight? Let me play a little bit of a few interviews that Alex Tabbitt did up in Toronto. I think he was using it as an excuse to go to a Blue Jays game, but he did a few interviews with some Canadians in Toronto regarding this tit for tat. Listen.
What do you make of this trade war right now?
I'm fully behind what Carney's done. U.S.
If you could talk directly to President Trump, what would you tell him?
I'd tell him just stop already. Just stop. Let the adults do the work now. It's time to retire.
He's recently threatened to rename Lake Ontario Lake America. What do you make of that threat?
So I think there was also talk about renaming Lake Michigan Lake Epstein.
We saw Vice President Vance call Canada a state recently. He said it was a Freudian slip, but this isn't the first time that an American leader has called Canada the 51st state. What do you make of that sort of rhetoric?
I think they should shove it right where it belongs. We got health care, they look after us, and it's fun being up here. Go down there, what do you get? Nothing.
Elise, what do you think?
Look, the Canadians are not buckling. And I think this is the thing. President Trump's bluster, his bullying, just like it didn't with the Europeans, with Greenland, it's just not, it didn't work last time when he threatened the tariffs on Canada, and it's not working now. The Canadians are saying, we'll match you dollar for dollar, A. They're saying, we're just going to keep continuing to call it like it's a joke for them. They're not going to recognize it. The international community is not going to recognize it. And as John said, I was reading this morning that Republicans in upstate New York, in Syracuse, for instance, don't want it. And the Canadians are saying, bring it. And Mark Carney has really been kind of one of the leaders of the international community to say, please, let's not, buckle under Trump's threats or bullying. We need to stand up to a bully. He gave a very impassioned speech in Davos that really, I think a lot of leaders resonated with them. And you've kind of seen that going forward. The Europeans, the Canadians are just not buckling under this bullying and threats. And this in particular on the Lake Ontario, I think, is directed at the Premier, Doug Ford, who has been one of the greatest opponents of these tariffs. So this is just kind of a joke. It's not helping President Trump's cause on a trade deal. So it's just bad strategy for the U.S. diplomatically. And it's bad for the U.S. because, as I said, the Canadians are going to match those tariffs dollar for dollar.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about what this is doing to other nations that we have been reliant on, or at least we've had good relationships with. It's helped us build our standing in the world. We've been telling these nations, our allies at least, to bend the knee. And maybe in the beginning it was working. As you've been saying, it's not working any longer. There's a whole lot more defiance. Now that they look at Donald Trump and they realize they can't even negotiate with him if they wanted to because he does not negotiate in good faith, what are they actively doing right now to build relationships that circumvent the U.S.?
It's right. It's like a workaround. And who are they going to? It's not like there are so many benevolent nations around. They're going to China. The Canadians have done trade deals with China. The Indians are going to China. And so China is really the kind of beneficiary of this all. And if you remember what happened with Greenland and President Trump picking this fight with Denmark and the Europeans, you just saw last week that the Chinese, for the first time, put this shipping lane around the Arctic for trade for Europe. And it is just part of this whole greater competition that I don't think the president really sees what's happening. And I think this is one of the dangers of having a president where nobody wants to say, Mr. President, for the U.S., this is a bad idea. Even if they do, they don't listen to him. He's got to have better advisors around him that are saying, Mr. President, this is really not helping the U.S. It's not helping competition with China. President Trump has been told yes for the first 4 years of his term. He was reelected, and they're telling him yes again. And at some point, by the time I think he sees it's not working, it's going to be too late. The Europeans kind of, they're disturbed and they're concerned, but they're, making workarounds. And as we said, that bullying is no longer working. Those tactics that might have worked at one point, he was very good at getting NATO to put forward more, money for their defense, for instance. And that really did, to his credit, cause a whole discussion in Europe about, defense spending. But on the whole, especially on the trade issue, Katie, it's not working because the Europeans have other trade partners. And this whole issue of tariffs in particular, the threatening, and it just isn't working.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The president has always believed he can control reality unilaterally through sheer force of will. And about a year and a half ago, when he retook office, I got to say, we went through a period where it kind of looked like he was maybe right. Like he would just say things and then that would be the reality. He issued pardons. He dismantled the government in grave violation of statute and the Constitution, steamrolled opponents, made allies of tech oligarchs. A year and a half later, though, reality's catching up, and he is increasingly ruling over a shrinking kingdom of make-believe. Americans are tired of the delusional 80-year-old president and his whims. He's ignoring their problems, almost aggressively so, flaunting it, in fact. The problems that he has caused, not just stuff that came out of the blue. Wars, inflation, dysfunction. He's obsessed with pursuing his vanity projects and his huge billion-dollar payouts for him and his family business. Now, he is doing something for which there is no constituency in America, and that is picking on a trade war with Canada. One that will absolutely jack up prices for Americans on all kinds of goods at a time when people say affordability is their biggest issue. An example of those goods, like toilet paper, especially. Just learned this actually recently. The U.S. imports more toilet paper from Canada than anywhere else. Could soon see a skyrocket in its price. That's along with other things like lumber and aluminum that we're paying more for than almost anyone else in the world, and car parts and liquor and a whole lot else. And all this has led to what feels like I don't know. Can you really ever say rock bottom with Trump? But this felt like kind of a kind of rock bottom this week, at least for the second term, which was this image today. It really struck me. There's this old man sitting at his desk with a little Sharpie, reduced to a state of total delusion.
So this is Lake Ontario in Canada and in the United States. But we're going to make a little change. We're going to call it something different than Lake Ontario. We're going to call it Lake America. And all it takes is a good pen and some intelligence. So Lake Ontario, that's gone. Lake America. So now we have a lake, and now we have a Gulf. Because we have the Gulf of America, now we have Lake America, without the of. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy Lake America.
I mean, just deeply pathetic. I mean, pathetic in a way that almost kind of gave me like the willies. If you're saying to yourself, that's crazy, he can't just rename a Great Lake by scribbling on a map, you're right. Today, he scribbled his signature on an executive order directing the Department of Interior to update the lake's name on U.S. maps. This is what consumes the President of the United States.
The lake change, Lake of America, was something I've been thinking about for a long time, actually. As you know, we took something called the Gulf of Mexico, we changed it, and now it's very routinely the Gulf of America. So if you think about it, we have a Gulf and we have a lake. Now all we need is an ocean. So maybe we'll have to change the name of the Atlantic and or the Pacific. Maybe we'll change them both.
Sure, buddy. Go ahead. Change them both. Change them both to what? American Ocean 1, American Ocean 2? Knock yourself out. Right all over the place with your Sharpie. You're doing great. Of course, it's not the first time we've seen Trump try to reorder reality with a map and a magic Sharpie. Remember this one? Or the hurricane tracks that he drew? See? He drew in there by Alabama. To, of course, the aforementioned Gulf of Mexico, which you heard Trump crow about just then. That was a few weeks after returning to office when, again, he was at his strongest, right? It's like, I am the king, and now it's Gulf of America. But now, Lake America? Lake America? You sad weirdo? Nobody wants this. You know what they want? They want cheaper gas. Just like the apparently AI-generated map the White House put out on social media to hype Lake America, a map that places Washington, D.C. inside North Carolina. Why not? And like the other anti-Canada post by the White House this week, a photograph of a bald eagle attacking a Canadian goose, though commentators immediately noted the image comes from a 20-minute clash between those birds last year in Ontario when the eagle descended on the goose unprovoked, and then the goose ultimately fought him off. Trump also has an answer to the rising price of groceries, especially beef. You ready for this? He signed an order to import 300,000 metric tons of beef from other countries to be sold here at a discount. Beef that comes from, well, we don't really know.
Mr. President, on the beef deal, which countries did you make that deal with? What are the sources of
deal?
The beef deal?
I don't want to say which countries, but there are a few countries.
There's a lot of ground beef that's sitting in other countries that would potentially help serve Americans, especially lower income Americans who really lean into the lean ground beef. And so this is a very short term fix from the president's perspective that he believed necessary to get lower cost beef onto American plates.
Which countries are we importing the beef from?
I will be very transparent, and that is over at U.S. Trade Rep. I am actually not part of any of those conversations, so I am not sure.
Now, I know you must be getting hungry just listening to that sales pitch. There's just some cheap ground beef that has been sitting in other countries. And they're going to ship it over here for all of us to eat, especially low-income Americans at a discount. Where's it been sitting? Has it been in the sun? Where exactly is it coming from? Who knows? It's above Brooke Rollins' pay grade. Seems maybe a lot of it's from Argentina, which, by the way, has fine, incredible beef. And that's also a country Trump has been trying to prop up their friendly right-wing government.
What do you have to say to U.S. farmers who feel that the deal is benefiting Argentina more than it is them, as they are a top
Argentina's fighting for its life, young lady. You don't know anything about it. I happen to like the president of Argentina. I think he's trying to do the best he can. But don't make it sound like they're doing great. They are dying.
Oh, well, Argentina, under their right-wing president, is fighting for their life. So we should do everything, obviously, we should do to help Argentina, particularly Argentine cattle interests. Side note, earlier this month, the USDA had to recall 30,000 pounds of Argentinian beef that was imported to Florida and Texas without any health or safety inspection. But again, he likes our president, so. Then there's the president's diluted new approach to the war that he declared that's directly added to the cost of your gas. On Wednesday, Trump literally declared, boy, man, they just can't get enough of the AI-generated stuff, right? He declared mission accomplished in Iran, posting this image of himself looking over George W. Bush and the Ayatollah beneath AI fighter jets that appear to be missing half their tail fins. Mission accomplished. Okay. Do you want to write that on Sharpie too? Show it to everyone? Except the war's still on. The U.S. military is still running down its ammunition stockpiles. Iran still isn't letting oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. One got struck, I think, this week. Trump's not going to let facts get in the way of his new map crusade.
Pretty soon I'll be declaring the Hormuz Strait a territory of the United States. We control it. We control it with the blockade. We have a blockade. We control it with a blockade. And I like the idea of declaring it a territory. I view the Strait of Hormuz as an American territory right now. It's an American territory.
Sure enough, here was Trump posting a map of the Strait of Hormuz as new U.S. territory. Nobody beats Donald Trump when it comes to renaming things on maps that are right in front of him. He's governing from a land of make-believe, a shrinking, delusional presidency in which he really thinks he can change reality with a few words. The Strait of Hormuz is hereby declared American territory, and so is Lake Ontario, except it's Lake America. Iran wants so badly to make a deal. The mission's accomplished. There is no affordability crisis. It's a hoax. His will against a real world, and it's worked for him for years. Really. I mean, it's why he's like this. But the real world, like nature, bats last. Gas is more than $4 a gallon. Interest rates are rising. American treasuries and bond yields. The mission is not accomplished. Donald Trump can wave his little magic Sharpie. But the rest of us, all of us, live in reality. We're the ones who have to pay for it all.
Here's what Donald Trump prioritized today. Not gas prices or affordability, not his war of choice with Iran, but Lake Ontario, pressing national issue. Today, the president signed an executive order trying to rename it Lake America in what's supposed to be a dig to our neighbors up north after he just reignited a trade war with the Canadians. Now, we should note, even if the U.S. accepts this change, no one else in the world has to accept it, and there's no indication that anyone will.
Of course they won't.
I don't even know what to say.
It is.
Well, look, you know what?
It's
Michael
crazy.
Still would usually say this. Now we done switched. You talking about it's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't usually say this. Usually when Michael is doing this, I'm like, sir, no, this matters. This is stupid. This is just so stupid. First of all, I think the president thinks that the lake is named after the place in Canada, but the place in Canada is named after the freaking lake. The lake is older than all of us. It's just so dumb. Nobody cares. No one gives up, about the damn Lake Ontario, Lake America, whatever you call it. We still in a trade war with Canada. Whatever you call it, prices are still too damn high. Whatever you call it, Republicans probably losing the House of Representatives. Whatever you call it.
That's it.
They should impeach you when they get together, when the Democrats get together. Whatever you call it. This is problematic.
I love it. I love it. I got my mini-me here. I don't have to say it because you nailed it. This is stupid. In light of everything we were just talking about with Bharat and the general in the last segment about the nature of the war of choice and the impact it has. I also want people to understand fundamentally that this war of choice has some consequences downstream because guess what? In December, your 18-year-old son and daughter has to register for the draft. Or son, because that's, we don't want women in the military anymore.
Service, yes.
So you have all these pieces that this administration is dabbling and playing around with. And none of it is serious in light of the things that the country needs the administration to focus on. Instead, Donald Trump wants to redraw maps, put his name on stuff, just take a Sharpie and scratch the name out and write America. Donald, that's not how it works, baby. You just can't do that.
Politics, too. If he wants to get leverage over Canada, this is only pushing Canadians further away. They're fully behind Mark Carney. They're like, yeah, don't capitulate. We'll hang in there. We'll suffer. Unlike Americans who were all like, oh, we don't want to suffer because of
Americans are like, what do the Canadians want?
Get these
tariffs out of here.
I frankly want cheap toilet paper and maple syrup.
Correct.
But then on a more serious note, I think of Afghanistan, and I think of how many Canadian men and women, service members, lost their lives and were wounded fighting with us, alongside us.
Trade wars notwithstanding, Simone, Canada has been one of our strongest allies. They have been at the table with us thick and thin. No questions asked.
This is what happens when you hand the keys of the greatest military power in the world to a petulant child, as Michael Steele has described it, to someone that is not invested in America's success, who is not invested in our relationships abroad, who doesn't care about the pain of our people. So how can we expect him to care about the pain of the Canadians? It's insane, but this is what the people that voted for Donald Trump, apparently this is what they signed up for.
What did you say it was again?
Stupid.
Well, the list of what Donald Trump didn't do today is, as usual, much, much longer than the list of what he did do today. Donald Trump did not do anything to win or end his war with Iran. Donald Trump didn't say anything encouraging to the families of the American military personnel serving in Donald Trump's war, not the slightest hint that those troops would be home for Christmas. The families still have no idea about that. Donald Trump did nothing to lower a single price of anything in the United States today. After promising his voters that prices would come down, he would bring them down as soon as he took the oath of office. And Donald Trump spent another day failing to end Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine after promising his believing voters that he would end Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine on the first day of his presidency. Donald Trump did not do one thing today that he promised his voters that he would do when he was running for president. And instead, Donald Trump decided to insult the intelligence of every voter who voted for him. And for the small minority of voters who are left clinging to the wreckage of the Trump presidency and still supporting Donald Trump went out of his way to insult them today. Because he apparently believes that the remaining Trump voters still supporting him are at least as stupid as he is. And so he believes that they are now impressed and thrilled that on the day that he did absolutely nothing useful as president of the United States, and on the day when he continued to try to destroy voting as we know it in America and destroy any semblance of stability in the Middle East and continue to push up inflation with his war and his tariffs, Donald Trump was absolutely sure that he could thrill the hearts and minds of his remaining fanatical followers by changing the name of a lake.
The purpose of this, more than anything else, is we're going to be changing the name of Lake Ontario, effective immediately, to Lake America.
That's what he did today. Remember when he promised to do that during the presidential campaign? No, of course we don't, because he didn't promise to do that. He was busy lying about how he was going to bring prices down if he got to be president. He was busy lying about pretending to care about an affordability crisis that has only gotten worse because he is president. And he now says that that affordability crisis, which he campaigned on without using those words because he doesn't understand them, that is a fraud, that no one is struggling with prices in America. No one. The issue he ran on, he's now saying is a fraud. And what matters to him now is renaming a body of water that was named 400 years ago before there was a United States of America. Imagine serving in Donald Trump's war in Iran today, and you see that that is what the commander-in-chief is doing today. That's what he did. That's all he did. That's what the commander-in-chief cares about today. Donald Trump's already said he's in no hurry to end his war in Iran. He's already said he has no timetable at all for his war in Iran. And then he proved it to everyone serving in that war today and their families by spending his time on the name of a lake. And everyone serving in his war knows that the name of that lake is not going to change, no matter what Donald Trump said today. No one in the world is going to go along with that change of name. The only power Donald Trump has is to change how that lake is referred to in federal documents. He cannot force anyone to call it anything other than Lake Ontario out loud. Donald Trump did this today because he is losing in his trade war with Canada. Donald Trump participated in the negotiating and writing a legal trade agreement with Canada in his first term as president. It was an update of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Donald Trump signed that new North American Free Trade Agreement, and then when he came back to the presidency, Donald Trump immediately violated the trade agreement that he had signed. And that is in the grand old American tradition of violating every agreement this government signed with the native tribes who were here on this land before us. The Department of the Interior was created in 1849 and had a terrible start, spending the rest of the 19th century in cruel and abusive violations of treaties with tribes all over the country. And so it is impossible for Donald Trump's Secretary of the Interior to be the cruelest Secretary of the Interior in history. That's taken by our 19th century secretaries. But he is, by far, the most clownish Secretary of the Interior. Doug Burgum, Donald Trump's buffoonish Secretary of the Interior, stood beside him today at the signing of the executive order about renaming a lake and cheered Donald Trump every step of the way. The executive order is to him. It's to Doug Burgum. It's to the Secretary of the Interior to carry out this name change in federal paperwork. The Trump executive order says, quote, "It is the policy of my administration to recognize the extraordinary contributions of the American people and the rich heritage of our history by naming great natural landmarks for our shared achievements." Okay, then let's start with the Dakotas. Doug Burgum was the governor of North Dakota. Dakota was not some American hero. Dakota, like Ontario, is a tribal word, meaning friend, friendly. That word does not honor the people Donald Trump wants to honor. That word honors the people who were here before us. So does the word Minnesota. So does the word Massachusetts, Michigan, Connecticut, and so many other important place names in this country that came from the language and the people who were here before Christopher Columbus ever sailed west. You can reach the Atlantic Ocean from Lake Ontario by passing through the St. Lawrence Seaway. Donald Trump's executive order about Lake Ontario today actually mentions the St. Lawrence Seaway, but says nothing about changing that name. Why not? It is a hydronym for a body of water on the border of New York and Canada, just like Lake Ontario. And it was named the St. Lawrence River in 1604 by a French explorer. So when is Donald Trump going to change that name to an American name? St. Lawrence was not an American. That name doesn't honor anyone in this country. What is important in this story is its proof beyond a reasonable doubt of the tiny-minded stupidity that guides Donald Trump through every day, every minute in the White House, and everything that he does in the White House, including waging war. He wages war as stupidly as he renames things on maps. He wages war as he fails to rename the St. Lawrence Seaway on the same principle that he used to rename Lake Ontario today. Why should that principle of honoring Americans only hold for Lake Ontario and nothing else? The reason is that it's not a principle. It's just gibberish made up by Donald Trump and the liars who work for him in the White House and the lying cabinet secretaries who stand beside him in the Oval Office, supporting every single bit of madness that he publicly exhibits. The Secretary of Defense supports a madman waging war in Iran. The Secretary of Health and Human Services revels in the fact that he gets to work for a madman in the White House who supports his utter, lethal insanity that he spews about public health. An Attorney General who defended Donald Trump in court when Donald Trump was convicted of crimes stands eager tonight to help Donald Trump commit more crimes against the Constitution and crimes against election laws in this country that forbid the president from having any role in our elections. Donald Trump has an attorney general who is as eager to help him violate election law in support of his illegal demand for state voter rolls as his clownish Secretary of the Interior is in standing beside him today in that shameful, ugly moment in the Oval Office. Donald Trump won 0 votes today with his attack on Lake Ontario. There wasn't one Trump voter out there who was drifting away from supporting Donald Trump because of his war in Iran or because of his increase in inflation through tariffs, which are really sales taxes on all of us, including every Trump voter. There wasn't one of those Trump voters who turned around today and said, oh, I'm coming back. I'm coming back to Donald Trump because he got tough with Canada, the best neighboring country in the world. He got tough with Canada by writing new words on a map that no one will use. This is the kind of madness that will live after Donald Trump's presidency, but it will not live in the presidency. We will never see madness like this in the presidency again if we're lucky. And Donald Trump alone now believes that his remaining supporters are so stupid that they will cheer him on the way the clearly stupidest Secretary of the Interior in history cheered him on today. There is much to fear in Donald Trump tonight. Renaming lakes is not one of those things. A madman in the presidency of the United States gives the world more to fear than anyone else could give us to fear. And what he did with the map of North America today can and will be ignored and legally undone. It'll be ignored from now on, and it'll be legally undone 2 years from now. But what he gave future historians today is further proof of how utterly lost he is in everything else that he touches. The English didn't know that George III was insane during his reign. But a couple of centuries later, it was a unanimously recognized historical fact, to the point where when Alan Bennett's brilliant play opened in 1991, titled The Madness of King George III, audiences could laugh, and audiences could give standing ovations. Our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be laughing at plays and movies about the madness of Donald Trump. Today's moment will be a scene in those plays and movies, renaming maps, renaming a Great Lake. That'll be in there. They will be able to laugh about the madness of Donald Trump, but we will have to endure it. We will have to survive it. And voters are now empowered to control the madness of Donald Trump by electing Democrats to Congress this year if our right to vote, very much including our right to vote by mail, survives the madness of Donald Trump.
So the U.S.-Canada trade war does not seem to be headed toward a truce anytime soon. The Wall Street Journal now reporting both countries are bracing for a prolonged dispute that could last until after the midterm elections. Trade talks broke down over the weekend. The Canadians say the White House kept adding last-minute changes to the proposed deal, but Trump administration officials say the problem is Canada.
They are one of the worst countries in the world to deal with. They have taken advantage of the United States for many decades, actually.
Your country screws us. You're the problem. Look in the mirror at your tariff codes. You are the problem.
What we've said to Canada is stop it. Stop taking advantage of America. It's over.
After a year of that retaliation, we've said enough. They came in and they wanted more, and we weren't prepared to do that.
Our next guest has been warning about the fraying relationship between the two countries, writing in the New York Times that Canada will have to decide whether it wants to be a U.S. partner or live under its control. Joining us now, Chrystia Freeland. She's the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and Finance Minister. She's the author of the upcoming memoir, Unreliable Boyfriend. Thank you so much for being here. It's almost like, as I'm just going through that intro, I cannot believe we're talking about the United States and Canada. How damaging could prolonged trade talks be for both of our economies? This serves no one.
Stephanie, I could not agree with you more. And at some level, it's so absurd that it can be hard to formulate words about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yes. South Park. I am old enough to remember South Park had this movie whose premise and it was like a comedy. And the premise was so ridiculous that it made it a joke. And it was called Blame Canada. And the premise was that sort of a pathetic U.S. government, to distract from domestic problems, was blaming Canada and actually ended up going to war. And what made it funny was it was absurd, because there would never be a conflict between the U.S. and Canada. But now there is. I am so worried about this, Stephanie. I am worried about it, of course, because it is going to hurt both of our economies. It is going to hurt Americans who are not feeling great about affordability. You know, tariffs are a tax. It's going to make things more expensive for Americans. But I'm also worried about this because I'm really concerned that it fundamentally changes how the world works. And I fear that we are at a moment when countries like Canada that have treasured their relationship with the United States are going to start seeing the U.S. not as an ally and as a partner, but as a hostile, dangerous force in the world. I think that's bad for America. I think it's bad for all of us.
You called this trade war self-mutilating. Can you just break down what would become more expensive? Because it's not like a huge number, but really it's this move that maybe no longer will we be partners that's so long-term damaging.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And look, I've been listening to your show, waiting to come on, and you talked about energy and gas prices. Well, one of the things that is so absurd about this trade war is in imposing tariffs on Canada, this is even without the Canadian retaliation, the U.S. is effectively making energy more expensive. One of the areas that the U.S. has imposed tariffs on, and this is your own choice, is 50% tariffs on Canadian aluminum. Mm-hmm. Now, aluminum is basically electricity in solid form. And so you are choosing to impose tariffs on the equivalent of 6 Hoover dams, on the equivalent of 466 data centers. And the last time I checked, AI was just so energy hungry. Americans were concerned about power prices, and you are voluntarily choosing to make them higher. That to me is just nuts.
Then give me the Canadian side, right? You were at the negotiating table for USMCA. You know Prime Minister Carney. You served in his cabinet at one point. What is your take on how he and his team are handling this?
Well, first of all, I want to correct one thing that came across in those clips that you played from the administration. This notion that Canada is hard to get along with. I think a regular American person will say, wow, that's kind of weird. I find the Canadians to be quite nice. But I can also give you a data point, which is Canada is the only G7 country that has a trade deal with every other G7 country. So the rest of the world finds it pretty easy to do trade deals with us, and they want to do it. The other thing that is so perverse about the current situation, and, you know, we just heard a bunch of Trump administration officials and the president himself talk about how terrible the current deal is. Guess who negotiated the current deal?
Jared Kushner.
Yeah, and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, I was there when the deal was concluded. He said this is the best trade deal ever. It actually is a great agreement. It is one of the few points on which Democrats and Republicans agreed. Sherrod Brown voted for it. Nancy Pelosi supported it. And Trump supported it. So the thing that is so frustrating and also scary for me is we have a relationship that was working. And for reasons that are really hard to understand, the White House is trying to break it. From the Canadian perspective, it looks like a pure issue of dominance, a pure desire to make us your vassal. And, Trump talks about Canada being the 51st state. When we see this kind of absurd economic hostility, it makes you think he really means it.
Chrystia, there are two things I really like: bipartisanship and your Canadian accent. But unfortunately, we're out of time, so we cannot discuss either one any longer. But come back and we can talk about it anytime. I really love your accent. Thank you so much. Good luck on your new book.